In this video, I'm going to show you exactly how the NBA could solve one of its most pointless problems, all without negatively impacting the players, owners, fans, or the league, as we get to the point. We begin by looking at the NBA's very strange calendar. Because of the way the financial year is run for the league, teams will get creative to make trades for draft picks that won't process for a week or more after the draft is done. Unlike in the NFL, NHL, or Major League Baseball, this results in players being drafted by a team that didn't really have the pick. Players will get called up on stage and handed a hat to wear for a team that they know they'll never play for. The player knows this, the commissioner knows this, the fans know it, the teams involved obviously know it. In 2019, 11 first-round picks were traded, with most of those players being introduced as having been drafted by a team that didn't actually pick them. The worst example of this is easily the 4th overall pick in this year's draft. Officially, on June 20th, the Los Angeles Lakers drafted DeAndre Hunter with this pick. However, on June 15th, they had agreed to trade that pick to the New Orleans Pelicans as part of a deal for Anthony Davis. It gets more ridiculous as on the day of the draft, New Orleans traded that pick, which wasn't officially theirs yet, to the Atlanta Hawks. So Hunter was selected by the Lakers in a pick that LA had traded to New Orleans, but had already been dealt to Atlanta, and the Hawks were the ones who made the decision for the Lakers to pick Hunter so they'd eventually get him. This cannot be the easiest way to make a trade. So why is it this way? Well, the NBA's fiscal year ends after the NBA draft, so players who are acquired at the draft will technically have part of their previous year's salary count against that salary cap. Teams trying to avoid additional luxury tax penalties or even stay entirely beneath the league's soft salary cap may not be able to afford to take on a player for the previous fiscal year. Fiscal year changes over on July 1st, but the so-called July moratorium prohibits most transactions for the new year from happening until July 6th. This leads to players being stuck on teams they'll never play for more than 2 weeks, all under the guise of trying to keep teams from going more over the cap. So what's the solution? Well, there are 2 concepts that come to mind. The first is inspired by baseball, which is permitting trades to be done with the inclusion of players to be named later. This would allow the draft pick elements to be swapped, with the currently signed players remaining with their soon-to-be former team until the end of the July moratorium. This is probably the simplest, as it doesn't impact the way anything else would go. It's simple, easy to follow, and wouldn't prevent teams from leaking which players are part of this deal to reporters and other general managers. The other option is a bit more radical, but also pretty straightforward. That is deeming that the salary cap and luxury tax will not apply between the morning of the NBA draft and the start of the July moratorium. Players' contracts that expire will expire as the moratorium begins, and it will have no impact on how the salary cap or luxury tax is affected or implemented. Basically, it allows teams to manage their salary crunch in a 10-day or so time frame without having to game the system, considered a reset period of sorts. Allowing teams to not be cap compliant for a short stretch would allow for trades to happen immediately. But the downside is that it's likely to be considered a negative for teams that would benefit from a larger team going over the luxury tax threshold. Even though teams are already finding ways to work around the luxury tax, waiving the ability for that tax to be in place for even a brief time may be considered too much of a negative for some teams to get on board with it. That's why we go back to the player to be named later concept. Including future considerations or a player to be named later is already done in other leagues to allow for a team to free up a roster spot or wait until a player is eligible to be traded, or even to save the new team from having to be the ones to pay up on a bonus owed to the player that's on the move. It's the smallest change that would still have a positive impact and the desired effect. Commissioner Adam Silver would still be able to walk up to the podium on draft day, just as his NFL and NHL counterparts do, and announce a trade. Instead of the Lakers picking a player for the Hawks thanks to Atlanta making a deal with New Orleans for an asset still in LA's possession, it would have worked a lot simpler. On June 15th, the Lakers would have traded 3 first-round picks, including the 4th overall pick in the 2019 draft, and players to be named later to New Orleans for a player to be named later. Then on June 20th, the Pelicans would have traded the 4th and 57th overall picks in the 2019 draft to Atlanta along with a future second-round pick and a player to be named later in exchange for the 17th and 35th overall picks. Then on July 6th, the Lakers would have gotten Anthony Davis from New Orleans, and the Pelicans would have gotten Lonzo Ball, Josh Hart, and Brandon Ingram. Finally, on July 7th, New Orleans would have sent Solomon Hill to Atlanta to complete that trade. Washington's random last-second insertion into that whole ordeal, by the way, would have just been completed on July 6th as well. Altering the calendar isn't some far-fetched concept either. Just last year, the Houston Rockets made the far more radical proposal of opening free agency prior to the NBA draft every year. That's a concept that the NFL already implements, but would be the opposite of the NHL. Major League Baseball's midseason draft is obviously unique when it comes to the big four sports. My suggestion is a bit simpler and a lot less radical. What do you think of this idea? Is this even a problem for the NBA in your opinion? Let me know in the comments below. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to the Odds On Favorites YouTube channel. I'm Goldfarb. Thanks so much for watching. See you next time.